All right, you guys, good morning or afternoon or evening. We are super lucky to be talking with this incredible mover today, Joy Brown. She is a movement artist based in Los Angeles, currently on your third or moving into your fourth season with the Jacob Jonas Company. She can fly, which not many people can do, so we get to hear all about that. Joy, welcome. Welcome. Would you mind giving us a little backstory and intro of who you are as a mover and how you got to Los Angeles and all the good things?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, first off. Excited to sort of share with you today and chat a bit. So my name is Joy Isabella Brown. My background is actually acrobatics. I was a self-taught acrobat for 5, maybe 6 years before I started dancing. After about 5, 6 years, I met this movement director named Jacob Jonas. He's the head of Jacob Jonas The Company. And since then, it's been 3 seasons, almost 4, of experimenting with this new wave of contemporary dance, meeting different forms of street art and different forms of non-traditional movements. So it's been kind of a wild ride, but yes, it's exciting now that I get to be in both worlds as a mover of tricking and also contemporary dance.
Yeah, fun. I mean, if you haven't seen her yet, if you haven't seen what you do, like I'll never forget when I first saw you on Instagram. I won't.
Oh my goodness.
And when I show friends, I'm like, look at this, look at that. It's like, it's awe-inspiring, and it is like someone has spent that much time getting to know their body and that much time taking major risks that it's actually awe-inspiring. Like, it makes you rethink about what humanity's capable of. And so it's fun to be talking to you this morning, for sure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Can you tell us where you started this acrobatic journey?
Yeah, sure. So I started when I was in maybe 8th grade. No, later on, maybe high school. My family was moving from Arizona to Los Angeles, and right before we moved here, I found this video on YouTube of this sport called tricking, which I didn't really know what it was at the time, but it was just a lot of people flying through the air, and it was flips, and it was movement, and it was really cool. So when I moved here, I was able to start taking lessons at a space called Joining All Movement. It's in Reseda, California.
Say it again one time. Sorry, Joining All Movement?
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it was called Joining All Movement. It's in Reseda, and they teach tricking. I believe they still teach, but at the time they were doing lessons 3 to 4 times a week. And I was lucky enough to be able, my parents would drive me down, and I started taking lessons. Eventually we had to move, but my movement coach at the time, his name was Dan Perez, and he said, hey, you have a really good understanding of your body. I think you should be all right if you keep training. I think you'll be able to do this. So from there, it kind of snowballed. My family moved a lot the next few years, but it was sort of my escape to go out and find a park or find a gym. And even if I was just by myself, it was nice to just go out and practice and train and learn new things. So that's how I got started with tricking.
Wow. Which was sounds like largely a kind of solo journey for you, like just where a lot of like dancers now you work with, we've relied a lot on the studio, and now we haven't been able to do that this pandemic. You know what I mean? We're like, yes, I show up and then I do the work because there's a whole community doing it, and there's a leader, versus you at a young age, you already had like a thing going where I'm gonna learn how to listen to my body, right? That's super
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah. And what's interesting about tricking specifically is for most trickers, most tricking performers, it is a very solo-based sport. Yeah. So it's interesting how that's kind of influenced, I think, my dance practice within a pandemic. For a lot of trickers, our training hasn't really changed. We're very used to going out and finding sort of a sacred spot, quote unquote, of just like a quiet space and being able to train and still practice regardless of what's happening in the world. So it's definitely lent to my ability to keep training both tricking and dance during this pandemic.
Yeah. Okay, so this sounds like maybe a tangent for a second, but I'm curious about, because I don't do what you do yet.
Yes.
I'd like to try at least one beginner version. What are some ideal spaces for you, like that you discovered, when I go here or I'm on this tennis court or whatever, I don't know, this is ideal for me to learn. You know, it doesn't, when you don't have, I can't have mats in a studio and whatever you need, or a trampoline, or I don't know, you know, how you learn, but what are some places in space, in public space, that you ended up realizing, oh, this always works out really nice. I want to keep, you know, using that.
Yeah, I think being out in nature specifically, for us in LA, like we're very much a beach culture. So anytime you head down towards the water, it's inevitable you're going to find someone else training or moving. So I often end up down there. But honestly, the sanctuary for movers I've found is parks. It's just a grass field. There's
Yeah.
one park near us that a lot of me and my friends will go to and move, and it's very much our safe space of just having a grass patch to work on. It's also a little softer in case you're trying something new. You're not going to hurt yourself too much.
Too much.
Too much.
Yeah, I want to hear a little bit more. I'm just like, this world is like unknown to me. So the tricking world. So before we move on to more 2020 thoughts, can you talk to us about like injury prevention and how you learned, you know, what you know, the mechanics of the body? Obviously it's hard to even put into words, but just, yeah, like, did you ever get majorly injured and have to kind of go through a season of learning something completely different from that?
Sure. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to only have one sort of major injury, which wasn't bad at all. I had a ankle sprain about a year into my tricking career. Um, I think what helped start me on the right path is that I was surrounded by trickers who were very conscious about conditioning and about knowing your body. What's interesting about our sport is that you won't really find two people who do the same movement executed the same way. So there's a trick called a corkscrew, and I could pull up 10 different people doing it, and they would each execute it differently because they understand their body's mechanics and how they condition so that it's safe. So I think it's been interesting just having a very like regimented stretching schedule and conditioning schedule since I started. For me, I know my hips naturally are very like locked. So that's something I have to focus on quite a bit, or else I'll get like hamstring pulls or, you know, groin pulls. Um, but I think it is interesting because I'll have friends who naturally have weak knees and they'll spend a lot of time conditioning their knees. And I think it just comes down to knowing exactly what your body needs. And that just comes from practice, practice, practice. And once I sort of figured out exactly what my body needed to remain at its peak, at its healthiest, I just try to do that every day as much as possible. And it's led to a lot of injury prevention. It's led to me being able to train without so much fear of hurting myself. And I think if you're mentally less afraid of hurting yourself, you tend to not hurt yourself quite as much.
Yeah, if you really know that you've maintained, you've activated everything.
Yeah.
Can I ask what you do to cross train sometimes? What are some
It's a mix these days. It's been a lot of yoga, actually. I've been really enjoying yoga. When I first started, I was a little hesitant to sit down and stretch or do movements that were slower for that long of time. But I've noticed that the more I train, I'll train like a basic gymnastics routine of splits, of hollow bodies. Gymnastics actually is very, very good to look to in terms of conditioning for our sport because there isn't a structured regimen.
Yeah,
But I'll do a lot of gymnastic style conditioning for my core and for my ankles, and then combine it with sort of the flexibility flow of yoga.
yeah, cool. Yeah, yoga was hard for me. I teach yoga, and it was actually amazing how long it took me when I look back at the years to embrace the slowness. Like, I
Yeah,
didn't even know how much I was resisting it until now. It's like, okay, I could just actually sit here forever. But that was not, not a thing. I
not
love
in
that.
the beginning, no.
Yeah, so much like nervous energy or whatever. So that moves me to wanting to hear about, you know, the cross section of you and Jacob Jonas and starting to embrace contemporary based dance movement in as well, and how that journey went for you.
Yeah, it was a struggle at the beginning for sure. Um, I think dance is very much about the in-between moments and the qualities of what you're doing, and tricking is very much about the more so the explosive moments and the execution overall.
Yeah,
Um, in the beginning, it was I would get like the blow ups fast, the jumps, and sort of the more intense transitions, but it was hard to learn how to connect movements to tell a story, as opposed to just sort of a one pass of tricks and then being done with it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, Jacob Jonas definitely shaped who I am as a mover quite a bit, and he taught me how to not only link movements together, but also how to perform them in a way that connects with an audience. Um, it took me a while, I think, to get into my body as opposed to being in my head. And if you're in your head while you're moving, it tends to not go very well. You tend to be overthinking what you're doing as you're doing it. But
Yeah.
the transition of getting from sort of up here to in here as I was moving and sort of feeling out what my body actually wanted to naturally do was a really hard, like very challenging experience, but very much so worth it. And it's affected every aspect of who I am as a mover today, because I think even when I'm solely tricking or solely dancing, um, I sort of have gained an awareness of my body through dance that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mm.
It's been an uphill battle, so to speak.
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think sometimes I guess some of these interviews that I've been doing where it's totally different from my journey, where I just slowly progressed from, 8 years old on into dance. That's kind of the more average like story, but it's so much fun to hear when, people start at age 22 or
Mhm.
whatever. And because someone came along and said, you know what, why not? And they just ran into the thing hard. We interviewed a guy who's from Los Angeles, Brandon Alexander. He was 18 when he moved out there with no dance training and just
Which
went
sounds yeah, it
and
sounds similar.
just did it and ended up, it was a 2-year length performer for Beyonce within 2 years, I think.
That's impressive.
2 years, 20 years old, you're
Oh
just
my
like,
gosh.
okay, like you have to have a certain level of grit and adaptability, right? Is part of our
Hmm.
whole theme on this summit. You really have to be willing to lay your ego down and just go, I'm a learner, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting about the LA sort of movement scene overall is there's a ton of people who have stories of that nature where if
Mm,
you show up and you know what you want to do, even if you don't have the exact experience for it, there is a way to make it happen.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, like you said, it really comes down to adaptability, I think, of just being able to read sort of the room and read what the industry is looking for, and also, yeah, just the level of grit to execute exactly what you want to do.
Hmm. That's cool to hear you talk about like being willing to read what the industry is looking for. I think that ties a lot into the reason that I wanted to interview you, obviously, is because I get to watch you move. Even though I've seen you guys in concert, I get to watch you move online now,
Hmm.
and you didn't stop through the pandemic. I mean, I'm sure you took lots of precautions and did what you needed to do for a second and readjust, but I would love to hear, well, before we go into that, really, I want to hear a little bit more about just working with the Jacob Jonas Company and you personally, how you guys made, what am I trying to say? How you figured out how to work together with so many different genres of movers, because there was, I guess, some breakers too, not all necessarily break dancers per se, but like people that kind of are much more floor based people rather than like, then there's literally highly ballet trained movers, and how you guys figured out how to collaborate together and learn together from each other. I'd love to hear you share a little bit more about that.
For sure. Yeah, Jacob's process is very collaborative and very magical in the sense where no two people really have the same training or the same history.
Yeah.
I remember coming into the company, and my first sort of dance movement piece I learned was with a mover whose name is Nick Walton. And his background is parkour specifically. He had never had any dance training. And we sort of were the perfect dance match because we were learning to understand dance together. We hadn't experienced this sort of style, and we came from very similar street-based backgrounds. But at the same time, I was also making movement with Joe Wilson, who is classically trained in ballet and contemporary, is one of the founding members of the company, actually. And yeah, it was interesting because for the first time, it was like, oh, everyone is very unique in their own way, but everyone is lending to this process equally. I think Jacob's really good at finding people who have a certain love for what they do, and even if it doesn't look similar to whatever else is in his company,
Yes.
he's very good at sort of curating the artists he works with. But yeah, it was interesting because in the beginning I would sort of get perspective from someone who was a little more like me in terms of movement, and then I would get perspective from someone who was very different, and vice versa. And I think that's honestly where a lot of the beauty of the work comes from, is that it's people with very different perspectives on movement who sort of collaborate and will improv and rehearsal, and will share bits of how we move. And then he'll take sections and he'll say, oh, that's really interesting. Can you teach that to someone else who doesn't move like you? And it'll translate on their body very differently. And we'll sort of go back and forth until there's this collaborative movement vocabulary. And that's really how pieces get developed. And yeah, I mean, Crash, On Me was the first full-length work I was able to be a part of with Jacob Jonas. It premiered at the Ford, I believe 2017. But that piece was interesting because sort of the main character is this breakdancer named Cujo, who's a very legendary breakdancer in the b-boy world. And even watching him create his solos, and then watching this quartet, which is made up of purely contemporary dancers, the movement vocabulary is so varied, but it's married so well, I think, because of the community we share and of the love the artists have for each other. It's a very collaborative, safe space, and I really haven't experienced anything else like it.
That's cool. Right. I do know. I was sad because Jacob couldn't make it out to Arizona that time, right? I think he was sick.
Yeah, he was injured, I believe.
Oh,
and yeah, right before Scottsdale, he wasn't able to come out with us. It was very last minute.
yeah, I wanted to kind of see his process. I'm like, it's rare, and it's awesome that he's been able to, that you guys can say that it's that safe with
Mm-hmm.
that much difference going on in the room. You could easily go, oh, well, I'm not where you are. Like, it's just easy to compare the inabilities if you look at it from that perspective, versus if someone's shaping a whole culture and environment around pulling the differences, and we're all in the same. So good.
Yeah,
Be
yeah. It's like it's
inflexible.
very much we're all in the same boat. There was maybe a moment when I first joined where I was like, oh, I don't feel like I'm experienced enough to be here. But it's always like based on insecurity. It's never based on the energy in the room, because the second I sort of opened myself up to just learning from everyone was so welcoming and was like, wow, like each person is incredible in their own right, and nobody's ever being put down for anything.
Wow. It's cool to hear you talk about the distinction between it being self-based or externally based. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I talk a lot about in the e-course and stuff, but I haven't heard anyone articulate it like that. When you take ownership for, this is actually my own junk, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
going up, versus actually there's some legitimate things happening in the environment that are like kind of moving us in that energetic direction of like self-doubt and insecurity, but it's not
Yeah.
for you. It's awesome.
No, not in that environment. That is interesting though. Sometimes it very much is contributed to by the environment you're in. And yeah, I think sometimes it's interesting to recognize it is more self-based. And for me, that was one of those instances.
It's cool. You guys, I just have like so much respect for y'all. Just watching you in the master class and watching you rehearse, and I really do. The way you worked with each other, and you taught even I don't know who it was that taught the master class.
I believe if it was Scottsdale, it would have been Nick and Miguel. I believe they taught a
Yeah.
floor work combination. Yeah.
Yeah, so wonderful, so good, and just like the way you guys collaborate, it's actually pretty rare. I've seen it only in a few other companies where there's that much ability to go low and then take back the leadership and go low, and not like there wasn't intimidation factors and like power moves and stuff. It was just like, yeah, boom, and this is how we work. You've created
Yeah,
efficiency, so good.
absolutely.
So real fast, I'm like so excited to hear, what was the thought process around when the pandemic started? What were you guys going like? How were you processing it and going like, okay, how are we going to move forward and make a plan to keep moving, because this isn't going to stop us. So what was kind of the process with you and your community? I know you and Mike work together a lot. Would love to hear about your process with that.
Yeah. Well, the pandemic was interesting because for Jacob Jonas specifically, there was a very in-depth season planned out, as there was for most dance companies before everything sort of shut down. So I remember the week that LA officially shut down, I actually wasn't in town. I was out of state with my sister, and Mike was also traveling, and we both got back. And I believe the next day, LA completely shut down. And we actually live very close to Jacob. So we went over his place and we were sort of talking about a game plan. And it was like, I don't think we're going to be able to be on stage for quite some time. And it was odd processing that at the time. I was like, oh, it might pass. Like, you know, who knows how long this is going to last. Just a lot of uncertainty overall, but we all definitely hunkered down and kept each other sane those first couple weeks. We would try to go outside and dance as much as possible. What was interesting is that our neighborhood has a lot of these empty garages, and we sort of, especially Jacob, because his background as a street dancer, he was used to training on concrete and different surfaces, and me and Mike as well. So we would go to these garages during the early days of the pandemic, and we would just dance, and we'd create things together, and we'd improv. And because we were quarantined together, sort of as this group of 4 or 5, we were able to still make work together and remain, you know, socially distant, remain safe. And I remember there was one day in particular, it was just me and Mike out there, and I was training, and he was making a phrase of movement, and I filmed it, and we posted it online, and the next day it had like 60,000 views or something, which for us at the time was like a lot of people seeing work. And the response was really interesting because people were suddenly really inspired by, oh, they're still dancing, like we thought the world was shut down.
Yeah.
And it kind of didn't hit us at first, I don't think. Later on, we had done a shoot with Jacob in Malibu where Mike was in this blue jumpsuit, and the photos went incredibly well on Jacob's page. He shared them, and people were very excited. And during that shoot, I had also taken a clip of him doing this slow motion turn.
Yeah, I remember.
And yeah, the classic blue jumpsuit video, and that was shared, and that essentially kind of broke the internet in a way. I remember seeing it pop up on my feed in so many different places, and I was like, whoa, maybe there's something here. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people who really appreciated it, and a lot of platforms who shared it as well. And since then, it's been a very natural evolution. The 5 of us, which is the core group, JJTC, Jacob Jonas, Joe Wilson, Emma Ariel, me, and Mike Tyus, we all have gone out of our way during this time to continue creating work, filming it, and sharing it. What happened really naturally, because Mike Tyus and I are actually roommates, is that we would end up doing a lot of these day trips and filming each other constantly because of the time we were spending together. And through that, it led to this really interesting creative partnership where we were sort of sharing work on a daily basis, because the shutdown was almost the blessing in disguise, where it was like, well, now we have nothing else to do but dance. What an interesting sort of opportunity, obviously not like to minimize sort of the destructive nature of everything that happened, but as an artist, it was an interesting perspective, because it was like, oh, we now have almost the freedom to do exactly what we want to be doing all day long. So we would just go out and we would do road trips, and occasionally we'd take 1 or 2 people. We tried to keep it as socially distant and safe as possible, but we were just going out and dancing. And it was also interesting connecting with nature, because all of a sudden nature was the safest place to be again. And in LA, it's like there's the city, which is very congested, and outside the city is sort of these mountains, these fields, these oceans, sort of this representation of freedom. And I think with so many people trapped at home inside, we really wanted to help convey these feelings of freedom, which we were lucky enough to access just by a 30-minute drive outside the city. And that became sort of the formula for our work was go outside, dance, share it, and hope that it affected people, you know, on the way out. And that's been our process so far, and it's led to some really unique opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, watching the way you guys are now shaping architectural spaces even more with dance is like, I just want to get out there. You're getting gritty. You're getting so dirty situations.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's like the mixture of like nature is this very free feeling to create in, and then these concrete spaces are like a lot more gritty and a lot more street based, but it's cool to have the balance and just be able to work with a lot of different types of environments.
Yeah. What was like, if you can think of like a location that you guys went to this year, what was one of your favorite? What was your personal favorite, if you can pick one?
Oof, that's tough. For me, it's close to home. There's a part of Malibu that actually the company frequents for different shoots, and I remember it was like the 3rd week into the pandemic, and it was the first time we had driven up there, and we just drove into the mountains, and we all got out of the car and just sat before we even created anything. And it had been like such a stressful week, and just watching the news and watching the cases rise. And all of a sudden there was just this sort of imminent sense of peace. And it was like, oh, it's going to be okay. And the location, I mean, it was beautiful. It's Malibu, of course. There's rolling hills and you can see the water in the distance. It's not really that much to write home about beyond that, but I just remember the sense of peace that was connected with it. Really, really was special for me. Also, beyond that, several weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go with Mike to Seattle. He was setting work on Women Dance Company. And there was an there was a beach in Seattle called Ocean Shores. And I just remember never seeing a place that was so vast. We got there and you can't really see it until you get there. And we walked up, you're walking up this hill. And we came to the top of the ledge and we looked over and we sat there maybe for 10 minutes just without talking. It was like, oh, the world is huge and beautiful. And it was very much, it sounds corny, but it was very much a moment of, wow, we can create anything. This is really possible.
I love that. Yeah, I believe wholeheartedly in that. So zero corn to me. It's for this.
Zero corn.
I like a lot of corn right here. So fun. I mean, I am a little jealous. Like I want like a dance buddy that I can just go on road trips with too.
It's the best.
I'm gonna look for him. That actually leads me to going like, you guys figured this out. You didn't make it complicated. You just moved in a space. And I'm sure there's so much skill with how you've learned how to film, and obviously the technique behind each other's movement and how much time you spent with that. But can you share with us like what you see, what you've experienced, especially being the person who the eyes are on as a performer in the digital space? What do you see for dancers? What do you hope for dancers as far as the landscape of the digital space and maybe taking new like territory in that area?
Yeah, I think right now especially is a really good opportunity for dance to become a more visible art form. The only stage we have is sort of this online platform, like the theaters aren't quite open. And yeah, I think I would just love to see more dancers either filming themselves or filming other people. For me, how I learned to best capture movement and share it online was to film myself. And that I would honestly just go out and I would set up my camera against a wall or against a water bottle in a shoe. And I'd film myself moving, and then I'd find what I liked. I'd study how I moved so that when I had to capture other people, I very much understood the instinct of a mover. I think a lot of the technique of how we capture dance is because you understand how people move as a mover. And I think a lot of directors of photography and a lot of different videographers might not have that perspective. So it actually gives us a leg up in capturing work. But it is interesting. I think a lot of the dancers we've been able to train with in the past month, whenever they eventually pick up a phone or a camera and they start capturing each other, they find it to be quite fulfilling, and the internet responds really well to it, because I think there is something so hopeful just about seeing a human move online, especially since you can't see them in person.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to hear you guys talk about, or you talk about how you guys discovered, look, what were some of your processes of opening yourselves up to new spaces of performance, obviously in public space. So whether it's like, I don't know what that thing is, the washway or whatever, it looks scary. Maybe it's not in my mind, I can only see it, but it's like that incline and it's concrete and I'm like, y'all are falling down and then you're catching each other.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the dam. Well, yeah, it was, I don't know. It's interesting because through Jacob Jonas specifically, he has always been a really big advocate for promoting the arts online just as much as live performance. So when you saw us in Scottsdale, our shows were equally as important as the film work and the work we were creating online. So as performers in his company, we're actually very used to going out somewhere early in the morning, 5 a.m, before the sun had even come up, and finding like a very gritty location and just getting used to being uncomfortable and moving in spaces where you wouldn't traditionally dance. So I think having that background and having sort of being introduced through his company to the idea of dancing in non-traditional spaces was incredibly helpful. I do see it sort of has given us an edge in terms of creating at places like the Dam, which are very much like we bring a broom every time we go, because who knows how much glass or how much, whatever is around the space.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's an openness to just creating wherever you are and using sort of the elements around you to your advantage that I definitely appreciate. I think he's sort of instilled in his dancers.
Okay. Yeah. That's adaptability.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm like, there's a lot, I feel like there's a lot more there. When you think about what you could see, what could you share with us that you guys together figured out how to work and collaborate together? What works for you in filming? You already said a lot about how being a mover yourself helps give you a leg up to be a filmer as well. But what works for you guys, like very practically? You know what I mean? There are some things where it's like, I think a lot of us get intimidated just from wanting, just even saying, I'm going to go do that and make that thing, because we don't know how like hard of a process it's going to be, or maybe even how easy of a process. We just feel intimidated by like, we don't know if we're going to make anything good, So like what worked for you in that regard?
Well, I think we share very much the same perspective. It's interesting. I was actually just talking with Mike about this last night. Every time we go out, we are very surprised when we create something good. I think it's very natural to have the expectation of like, what if we don't make anything this time? Or like, oh, what if it doesn't work? Or what if we're not inspired? I think the key is really just starting.
Yeah.
We'll often drive to a place without the expectation of wanting to make anything. It's just, hey, I know this place is beautiful and maybe we can go and maybe we can move and maybe we can just go and stretch. And I think that's even like a good start for a lot of people who are more hesitant, is like find a space that you're interested in and just go there and see what happens in the moment. Because I think we even rely on this element of serendipity almost in a lot of our work, of we're going to show up and we're going to see what happens. And I think if you trust yourself as a mover and you know what you like and you know how you express yourself, there will be something beautiful that comes out of it. So just showing up, just finding a space and showing up to the space. Beyond that, if you have a phone and you have a shoe, set up your shoe, lean the phone against it. Yep. Aim it towards yourself and just move. And usually what happens is that you'll go back and you'll pick up your phone and you'll watch the video. And usually what happens is you'll say, oh, that's cool, I can do that better. You'll set your phone down again and you'll do it again. It's kind of just who we are as artists, as we see our flaws and we want to improve on them. So I think it's a very low budget, high inspiration sort of creative scheme. But that's how I think we've been able to create a lot of our great work, is we just go, we show up, and then we say, let's try something. And as artists, I think you have to let your instincts take over at some point, because it will, especially when you want to create, it does happen. And that's how I think we've been led to a lot of our most sort of serendipitous good work, is just showing up.
That's cool. It's really cool to hear that. That really makes sense, decreases the intimidation factor, I think. So lastly, like the thing that I would love to hear, have you received any criticism, like this is just an iPhone video, or, how have you gone like, this is actually something we want to move in the direction because we're seeing this as valid work,
Absolutely. I think it's almost the opposite, and that's what's encouraged us to continue. Is we'll post things a lot of times and the next day we'll get maybe 6-7 messages between the two of us of, hey, what camera was this filmed on? What was your settings? What was the ISO? What tripod did you use? Which drone was this? And it's kind of fun after a while to just be like, no, this was me in my phone. But I think it's been very encouraging, especially modern technology is so very good and such a high standard that it wasn't at before, that I think we've figured out a way to almost, I don't want to say cheat the system, but almost create work that is equally on par with cameras that are much more expensive, or work that's being created at a much higher budget. And I think at first it was almost like, not embarrassing, but like a tad hesitant to mention, like, oh yeah, we're going to go out and we're going to film on an iPhone today. And then after a while, the feedback was so positive that I think all those fears sort of disappeared. And when it started leading to actual work, which was actual commercial shoots or actual brand collaborations, it was like, oh, okay, what we're doing is being seen and is being considered legitimate enough to continue at a professional standard. So I think just not shooting down the resources we had access to has led us to a lot more confidence in what we're creating, and has also encouraged us to just keep making things. You know, the opportunities keep rolling in, and sometimes like work is more at a lull than other days. But it is just encouraging that people see our work and want to continue letting us do it or fund us to do it. I don't think we actually thought we'd get to this point. So it's been a nice surprise, and it's been really beneficial for both of us as artists.
Yeah. When you say both, who do you mean?
Specifically me and Mike Tyus and our partnership. Yeah.
Cool. And does that have a name?
Not quite yet, but
Okay.
if you have one to suggest, I would love to hear it. It's
Oh,
still
fun.
in the works.
Cool. That's rad. Okay, I'll think about it. No, I'm just kidding. Did you say something about tactful work?
Tactful work.
Yeah, maybe I just misheard you. I'm like, that was I thought maybe it was a project you were doing that I didn't read through in your bio or something. Got you.
Well, no, but I do like that phrase. Now you've inspired me. Now I have to make something based off that.
I know. I'm like, I thought that was your thing. Okay, well, you just marinate with that.
Okay.
So good. So just the last thing I think that I want to hear is like, how can we help our dance community, get brave and to feel valid making work with their iPhone? Honestly, I mean, I think you've covered a whole lot of it, but if there's any bits that you feel like you want to wrap it up with, I wanted to comment on what you just said. That we just use our iPhone. But I'm like, I actually heard of so many like high end, whether commercial photographers or product photographers or whatever they do, like letting go of their equipment and going, I actually love the iPhone and I'm going to totally just use that. So it's like, well, thank God for Apple,
Honestly, thank
for
God
us,
for Apple. Yeah.
right? And so I just love to hear maybe wrap it up a little bit in the sense of like, helping validate this new space, this new territory, and be brave inside of it.
Yeah, funny enough that you say that, I actually, before we got on this call, was on Instagram and I saw Apple's latest Instagram stories, which is promoting their 12 Pro. And they essentially shot a film on it. It shoots at Dolby Cinema quality, which the average everyday person wouldn't really need in a phone, but to say the least, I think we have more access to high quality filming material than ever before. The iPhone 11 came out earlier this year, I believe, or maybe even last year, but I saw it and I was like, it seems like a good investment in my work. And even friends of mine who have older generations of iPhone, they really know how to do cameras well. I think if you have access to one, it is honestly the most ideal thing to shoot on. I've even been on recent shoots this past week with some more established commercial director friends of mine, and they said, well, I'm essentially going to get rid of my cameras. I have an iPhone now. Like there's nothing the phone can't do. So I think just letting yourself sort of be encouraged by the fact that you have all the tools you need to start. You don't have to spend a ton on a camera when you're first getting started.
Yeah.
I think what will help capture dance the best if you're getting started is to shoot in broad daylight. One of the things the iPhone hasn't fully figured out yet, although I hear they're working on it, is low light conditions. So when we shoot, a lot of our work is outside or at a park. It's usually very bright and it's very sunny. So I would say to shoot in the daytime specifically. A lot of work, it depends what you want to create for. We create for social media, and for me, I think that's the best way to get your work out as fast as possible. And when you're shooting for social media, you're going to want to turn your phone vertically. As opposed to horizontally. We shoot most of our work in the vertical format. And that's to be able to have clips for both Instagram stories, and you can crop them down to 4:5, which is perfect for posting. But when you film, I always think about keeping the subject in the dead center of the frame, regardless of how far they move. You can track, you can go side to side, up or down, but always aiming to keep your subject centered. Keeping the light as bright as possible, and then also just finding really unique backgrounds. I think for us, it was like, what catches your eye? And sometimes it doesn't have to be the most spectacular outdoor location. Sometimes it's as simple as something clean, like, a brick wall or the wall of a garage even. I think the simpler you can keep your backgrounds, the better. just to really let the subject shine and to let the dancer shine. It's kind of abides by the rule that normally less is more. Less is more in terms of the equipment. You're using an iPhone. Less is more in terms of the location. Try to find something simple. And less is more in terms of the camera movement. Just keep your subject centered and focus on what they're doing, and that should highlight everything that's on camera.
Yeah. Keeping the dance, keeping it simple too, like keeping it about the dancer and that.
Absolutely.
Subject. Yeah. Joy, this has been, I was going to say a joy, but then I was like, it actually has been though. So good. Yeah, thank you. You're so articulate, and just your journey is really, it's inspiring because you really have worked hard to get where you are today, and you're humble about it and you're approachable about it, and we appreciate that. For sure. She's Joy Isabella Brown on Instagram. And I'm excited to see you continue. Like, I feel like, you know, literally the sky is the limit, or the shores are wide. They are infinite for you. So thanks for the story today. And we'll keep our eye out for anything that develops with you and Mike, and always what Jacob is doing. And yeah, you guys make sure you go, there's a link, click the link, go watch, or you'll probably get just stuck scrolling for a while. Thank you. Have an amazing day. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye, you guys.